The narrative that I chose to read this term is called Not Just Spirited, and it is written by Chynna T Laird, a mother of a daughter, Jamie, who lives with a sensory processing disorder. Now, what is a sensory processing disorder? This is an excerpt straight from the book. It says, for most of us, sensory integration is normal. That's when our brain takes in information from around us, processes it, then sends messages to the body on what to do with that information. Jamie here doesn't have this sensory integration. When her brain takes in the information, it gets scrambled and it doesn't understand how to read those messages. Because it can't read them, it doesn't know what to do with them, which causes confusion. And that's why Jamie breaks down. This is a heart-wrenching and hopeful story that follows the perspective of Chynna T Laird, a devoted mother to her daughter Jamie, who's living with a sensory processing disorder. Chynna knew something was different from the moment that Jamie was born. Simple tasks such as changing a diaper or having a stranger say hello triggered Jamie into terrible fits to the point where she put her own life in danger. Things became severe when Jamie refused to eat, sleep, wear most clothes, or go to the bathroom. She went to countless doctor appointments, but their family doctor chalked all these characteristics as part of her going through a spirited stage. It took a traumatic meltdown for the pediatrician to finally connect Chynna to the Edmonton Early Intervention Program, which led them to Donna, an occupational therapist. Donna is the one who led them to a potential SPD diagnosis, and she's the one who was saying that quote from the first slide. Now, Donna's relationship takes a little bit of a turn when she thinks Jamie is ready for physical touch, which creates an explosive reaction, which ultimately ends the working relationship. Then after many months of waiting, Chynna, Steve, her husband, and Jamie attend a triage assessment, which is an assessment where the doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, and occupational therapists are all together. There are some recommendations for play therapy that emerge, and Jamie began working with Brian. Even though things improved temporarily, they quickly declined. Medication was brought up by the psychiatrist, which Chynna and Steve were completely opposed to. They wanted a holistic approach for their 3-year-old daughter. They used self-regulation practices as well as a targeted diet to help Jamie. They tried putting Jamie in a YMCA preschool program, but the constant change in staff was not a good fit for Jamie. Eventually, Jamie made a neighborhood friend, Chynna, to which she responded well and was an overall turning point for Jamie and the family. Jamie continued to attend preschool 2 days a week, a challenging but big milestone. Kindergarten was the next big step. Chynna expressed anger that the school was pushing to have Jamie start in grade 1 because they would receive more money to support her. But Mrs. P, an experienced kindergarten teacher, advocated for Jamie and ensured she was in an environment that was best for her needs. And in Chynna's words, she described Mrs. P like this. Mrs. P seemed to get why school may seem so stressful for Jamie most days, when it was no big deal for other children. Chynna ends the story by saying, "Don't give up. Things will be okay," as an encouragement to parents who might be experiencing the same thing. Now, there are a few key characters that I've touched base on, but there are some other ones that I'd like to elaborate a little bit more on. The first is Chynna, who is a loving, determined, fierce mother who fights for support for Jamie. She plays the role of mother, advocate, and champion for her daughter. Jamie is Chynna's beloved daughter who experiences firsthand the many severe challenges of SPD. She is the protagonist that gives us insight into the daily challenges of living with SPD. Jamie teaches us that you are stronger than your biggest challenges. Steve is a devoted father who fights for the support and love of his daughter. Jamie is set off by anything he does and has great difficulty being around him. Ultimately, this alienates Steve from Jamie, which is devastating as a father, yet his love and support for both Jamie and Chynna endures. Steve teaches us about unconditional love and humility. Donna is the first OT to work with Jamie. Although it ends poorly as described in the synopsis, the positive effects Donna leaves is critical. She's the first to write a report that highlights Jamie's behaviors as more than sheer sensory preferences and requests further action. Chynna writes this lovely dedication to Donna. God bless Donna and the hard work she did to get Jamie the help she needed. We'll always be grateful to her for what she did. Thanks to her and her willingness to listen to us, we got further than we ever would have gotten on our own. Donna teaches us that we do not have to be perfect at our jobs to make a lasting impact. Joan is a breath of hope. She is the connection that Chynna finally has to a family who completely understands the hardships they have faced for the past 3 years. Joan also has a daughter with SPD and is integral to walking Chynna through the triage assessment process. Joan teaches us that we are not alone in this world. Jenna was Jamie's first true friend. She was the first child to not trigger Jamie. She was able to hug Jamie, which was a massive milestone. Jenna's birthday was the first birthday party that Jamie ever attended. Jenna is a wonderful representation of inclusion and acceptance. Mrs. P is Jamie's kindergarten teacher and is a small miracle. She advocates for Jamie when admin tries to place her in a grade 1 class for funding reasoning rather than well-being. She is able to connect Chynna with many services and knew from the beginning what Jamie needed. Chynna describes her as the sort of teacher who focuses on a child's strengths and didn't let him or her use their special needs as excuses not to do things. Mrs. P sets the standard for what a good teaching can do for a child with special needs. She reflects the marriage of head, heart, and hands as her expertise is met with compassion. I think the overarching theme that emanates throughout the whole story is a simple one. Listen. Listening in terms of hearing verbal pleas, but also listening to body language and behaviors. After all, behavior is a form of communication. Chynna observed and listened to the challenges and needs of Jamie even when it was difficult. It took 2 years for the pediatrician to listen to the dire cries of Jamie's parents to finally take action. Jenna and her parents listened to the needs of Jamie expressed by Chynna and even accommodated Jenna's birthday by having Jamie come before everyone else to help her be included. Mrs. P listened and advocated for Jamie when admin tried to put her in an environment that would set her up for failure because of money. Mrs. P also listened to the strengths that Jamie had and highlighted them to help with her transition. Listening seems to be the key to successful collaboration. Now, from an educator's perspective, I think there are 2 main takeaways. The first is that teaching is a team effort. Kindergarten was successful because there was open communication and collaboration with parents, the classroom teacher, and the resource team. Chynna expresses, Mrs. P and I set up bi-weekly meetings in order to keep a strong connection between school and home and to maintain consistency. That's so important to Jamie's success. My second indispensable takeaway is good educators lead with compassion. I keep coming back to Palmer's article about the soul. He frames, I think, the most important question a teacher can ask, especially when working with students with exceptionalities. Who is this child, and how can I nurture his or her gifts? This approach nurtures the soul and fulfills the need to be understood and beloved. There's one thing that I would like to end with, which is just an excerpt from my summary. And it highlights and compares and contrasts Mrs. P and Donna. And just there's one key thing that I'd like to share with you. So it says, knowledge and expertise are wonderful assets like Mrs. P shows us, but perfection of these virtues are not a necessary ingredient to make a deep impact. Donna reflects this. She gives us hope that if we lead with compassion, even if we make mistakes, we have the potential to drastically shift the trajectory of someone's life. Thank you so much for listening.